A rural Pennsylvania farmhouse. The flicker of oil lamps. Three men whisper prayers, convinced they're about to destroy a witch who has cursed their lives. Hours later, the house is ablaze. A man lies butchered with a broken iron poker, and the curse seems more real than ever. Welcome back to Legends May Live, where we explore the strange, the mysterious, and the downright eerie. I'm Drew, and today's episode is one that blurs the line between fantasy and reality, with one tragedy after another. But before we begin, just a quick note. This is a true story, but sometimes sources may conflict. Details can be blurred through the lens of time, and names will most likely be mispronounced, so just take it as entertainment. Around midnight in late November of 1928, three shadows move along a farm lane in rural Pennsylvania. No flashlights or lanterns, just the crunch of frost under boots and the soft glow of a farmhouse window. They have rope and a story that they've told themselves so many times it feels like truth. This is not murder. This is medicine. They creep up to the front door and knock. After a few seconds, the door opens, and the old man on the other side greets them with stoic calmness. He answers their questions with more questions. He isn't afraid of them, but he should be. They swap questions back and forth for several minutes until tempers fray, and then the plan unravels. Hands close around a throat. A heavy blow. Another. Something iron breaks. The room fills with the copper tang of blood and choking whispers that sound like a prayer. Or a curse. When it's over, the three men do something desperate. They strike a match and turn the house into a pyre. If fire destroys what they came for, the nightmare ends. That's what they were told anyway. The fire grows and the wood pops for a moment, and then, as if the hollow itself takes a breath, the blaze starts to fade. It scorched a corner of the room, blackened the floor, touched the beams, and then dies. The house will not burn. By morning, the smoke is cleared, but the smell still lingers. And what the neighbors find inside will make front-page headlines across America and give this valley a new name: Hex Hollow. Now, to understand how three ordinary Pennsylvanians became arsonists in the name of self-defense, we have to go back a bit. In the early 1900s, York County, Pennsylvania was a place of rolling fields, tight-lipped towns, and an old belief system with German roots called powwow or Brauerei. The tradition combines older European folk magic with Christian prayers and biblical verses. They used verses as prescriptions. There were paper charms pinned to barn doors, whispered prayers to guard a baby's cradle or to turn aside a storm. So what it looked like was these rituals combining spoken charms or incantations, gestures, and the use of everyday objects alongside Christian prayers. And this was really something practiced mainly for healing, but then people got to thinking, if there are prayers that heal, then there must be prayers that harm. And that's where the fear found its roots. One powwow healer in York County was Nelson Redmeyer. He was a fairly reclusive farmer, and his home was kind of off in the woods, sort of by itself. But in spite of his preference for solitude, he was always willing to help out anyone who needed healing. And many found him very helpful, but others were afraid of him. He kept to himself, and they really didn't know much about him except that he knew these healing rituals, and if he could heal, then he could probably curse. But since he kept his distance, those suspicious of him kind of kept theirs too. Then there was John Blymeyer. On paper, he really wasn't anyone out of the ordinary. He was born and raised in York County among the Pennsylvania Dutch. He grew up knowing the same folk remedies everyone else did. For colds, a whispered prayer; for livestock, a chalked symbol over the barn door. If the milk spoiled or a baby sickened, you didn't really call a doctor. You asked who might have sent it. And John wasn't just a believer. He had a reputation of his own as a powwower. People came to him for charms and protections and for little bits of borrowed luck, But for all the help he offered, by his late 20s, it was him that needed help. At first, he starts losing weight. And it's not that he doesn't have enough to eat. It doesn't matter what he does. He's just losing pound after pound. And he's tired all the time, just totally exhausted by any bit of effort. And because of this, he starts to lose work. He's getting fired for being too weak to do the job or too distracted. And wherever he goes, it seems like misfortune isn't far behind. He's also plagued by sick animals, missed wages, arguments at home, and pretty soon John decides that this isn't random. This isn't just some sickness or string of coincidences. He believes that it's targeted. He is sure that someone has put a hex on him. He doesn't know who, but he's convinced that someone, maybe an old rival, maybe a neighbor, someone has him in their grip. But regardless of whoever's done this, John just needed it to end. So, desperate, he seeks out other powwow doctors, and each one offers him a cure. They give him a charm or a prayer, some ritual, and so John does it. He goes through every promised cure, and he carries papers, recites verses, ties knots and strings, but nothing works. So, whatever he has wrong with him isn't getting any better. He's still constantly run down. He can't concentrate. And there's just this gnawing sense that death is around the corner. It's a death, and it's a dead end that just makes John spiral deeper. If smaller rituals can't free him, then this curse must be stronger, something rooted and anchored to a powerful source. So John consults an older healer known as the River Witch of Marietta. She tells him, "You are under the spell of a witch more powerful than you. To break it, you must find his book or take a lock of his hair and burn it." And the one she points the finger at as having done all this is Nelson Rehmeyer, the reclusive farmer with a reputation for powwow work. And John had known of him for years, but now every shadow in his life points back to this one guy. And so John becomes obsessed with the farmer. He starts watching Nelson and talking about him constantly. To John, every cough, every bad dream, every failed job interview becomes evidence that the old man in the hollow has a rope around his soul. He doesn't think, maybe I'm sick. He thinks, this man is killing me. But for a while, John does nothing. He's afraid to do anything. He thinks if he tries to find the book or take a lock of the hair and it fails, this could get so much worse. But eventually, declining health and just everything wrong with his life becomes too much, and desperation takes over. So he finally works up the courage to confront Rehmeyer. And so he goes to see the old farmer, and when he gets to the farmhouse, he knocks on the door and just kind of waits for a fight. He braces himself, but to his surprise, Nelson didn't attack him. He didn't even threaten him. He didn't show any kind of hostility at all, in fact. Instead, he was calm, welcoming, and polite. He invited John inside, and they talked. And while they're inside the farmhouse, John is casually looking for signs of witchcraft, maybe a spellbook, maybe a ritual type of something, just anything he can find. And he's not sure what to make of the situation, but he didn't find anything. He couldn't find a single thing that pointed to Nelson being responsible. So the visit ended without violence, and Rehmeyer simply let him leave like a friend who had come for a visit. But John, instead of thinking, I must have been wrong, he isn't a witch, he thought the opposite. He convinced himself that Rehmeyer was so powerful, he didn't even need to kill him right away. He could just let the curse linger, just strangling slowly and making him waste away over time. This really only proves to John that the curse is real. By 1928, John has lost nearly everything. He's lost his health, his work, his family, and that's when he crosses paths with two teenagers facing their own rough patches. For John, this meant that the curse was spreading and that Nelson's reach was just growing. The younger of the boys was John Curry. He was 14 years old, and he'd grown up poor, bouncing between relatives. He was also small for his age, and that led to him being made fun of or mocked a lot, and that made him desperate to prove himself. So when Curry met John, here was an older man, serious, intense, who didn't laugh at him or talk down to him, but instead he treated him like an equal and even confided in him. And they talked about curses and sicknesses, about invisible forces that stalked men just like them. And to a boy hungry for importance, it sounded like an initiation, like a secret club where he finally mattered. Then there was 18-year-old Wilbert Hess. Wilbert was a farm boy already beaten down by life. His family's crops were struggling, and some kind of sickness had passed through his animals and killed off a lot of them. And every day as a farmer was enough of a struggle, but now all that work that he had put into plowing, to sowing crops, to tending the animals, to building fences, just everything that he had done was for nothing. And no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't keep up with the bad luck. So when John approached him, Wilbert didn't scoff. He nodded because he knew what it felt like when everything in your life just goes wrong and refuses to go back. John's obsession was consuming him, and now he was passing along his paranoia to the boys. He told them, "It's not your fault. It's him, Nelson Raymeyer. He's the one binding you. He's the one killing us slow." And once they all agreed that it had to be a hex and that this guy was doing all of it to them, the guy's destroying their life, there was only one question left, and that was, what do we do about it? So the three hatched a ritualistic plan just straight out of powwow lore. They were going to sneak into Raymeyer's farmhouse, find his copy of The Long Lost Friendship. It's a legendary powwow book said to hold healing powers, or rather, healing prayers, protective charms, and possibly darker things. And if they couldn't find the book, they would take a lock of his hair and burn it. That, according to the River Witch, would break the curse and free them from the nightmare. And soon they were done making plans and ready to take action. On Tuesday, November 27th, 1928, late in the evening, the three guys, John, Wilbert, and Curry, made their way across the barren fields through the brittle, frosty air toward Raymeyer's farmhouse. In whispered voices, they go over the plans again as they approach, more out of nervousness than anything else. Their plan is to slip inside, find the book, or take a snip of hair, get out, and burn whatever it is they're able to grab. John's last visit was a peaceful one, though he was sure it was due to Raymeyer's confidence and power, but still he thought it best to do things the same way. Knock on the door, go in with 3 sets of eyes, maybe they could find what they're looking for, or at least grab a lock of hair. So that's what they tried. The three just stand outside the door of the farmhouse, and John takes a deep breath and then knocks. It's just a few seconds before the door creaks open, and there he is, Nelson Raymeyer, the man John believes had been choking the life out of him for years. Except Raymeyer doesn't look like a villain. He doesn't snarl, he doesn't threaten, he just invites them in. And once again, John interprets the calm as proof of power, and the others see it too. This isn't a man worried about being attacked. It's a man confident that he can't be touched. Inside the farmhouse, the interior is modest. Oil lamps hiss, shadows crawl up the walls. They talk as the three intruders circle awkwardly, pretending to be interested in the conversation, while their eyes dart for the spellbook. Raymeyer is quiet, polite, even helpful, answering questions, offering them a place to sit, just being an overall good host and a kind older man. But as the visit goes on, the book doesn't appear. The scissors stay pocketed. The plan already seems to be a flop. And hours drag on. The men grow more and more on edge. Raymeyer's also kind of getting tired, and he's ready to turn in for the night. But then something small happens that changes everything. Curry swears later that Raymeyer reached for him. Wilbert insists the old man muttered a curse under his breath. John claims he felt an invisible weight just pressing down on his chest. And whatever it was that actually happened, it shatters the fragile calm, and the three pounce. And the farmer doesn't go down easy. Raymeyer's 60, but he's strong, with a farmer's muscles just hardened by years of labor. And he fights back. He throws one of them off, nearly breaks free, but eventually the three are able to overwhelm him, and they beat him with a stick. They wrap a rope around his throat. They hit him repeatedly with an iron poker until it actually snaps. For a moment, the farmhouse is just filled with chaos, sounds of boots scuffling on wood, wheezing breaths, loud huffs, and muffled cries, and then silence. Nelson Raymeyer is dead. For a moment, the three just stand there, staring at what they've done. This wasn't the plan at all. This was never supposed to happen. But John starts to collect his composure and turns to the others too and just says, "We have to burn it. All of it. That's the only way the curse ends." They grab a container of kerosene and pour it out all over the room. They take a step back, strike a match, and toss it to the floor. They watched as the flames roared to life. The fire rolls over the curtains, the bed, the floorboards, the body, and then it just stops. The flames sputter, shrink, and die, leaving behind only scorched beams and the smell of half-burnt flesh. The house refuses to burn. And to the three men, this feels like confirmation that Raymeyer's power is so strong, even fire won't destroy it. At that, they just panic. They take off running into the night, leaving the farmhouse in just eerie silence. By morning, the smoke was gone, but the smell still lingered in the air. Curious neighbors decided to pay Raymeyer a visit, but when they step into the farmhouse, what they see freezes them in place. There are those charred floorboards, the blackened beams, and the battered body of Nelson Raymeyer. The fire hadn't erased the crime. If anything, it preserved it. And soon, whispers ripple through York County. They killed the witch. It doesn't take long for suspicion to point directly at John. He had been open about his belief in hexes. People knew about his failing health, his obsession with curses, and he had been seen with the Curry boy and Wilbert Hess just days before, so the police tracked them all three down, and to the surprise of the police, the three freely confess, almost casually, because in their minds, this wasn't murder, this was self-defense against witchcraft. When the press gets wind of it, the story explodes. Front pages say, "Witch murdered in Pennsylvania. Hexman slain in his hollow. Superstition sparks grisly killing." Suddenly, a local crime becomes national news. Reporters descended on York County, eager to paint it as just another Salem. And the name it's given sticks. From then on, the valley around Raymeyer's farmhouse will be called Hex Hollow. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere is equal parts trial and carnival. Reporters sketch the faces of the three accused, describing John's haunted eyes, Curry's small frame, and Wilbert's nervous fidgeting. The defense doesn't deny the killing. Instead, they lean into superstition, arguing that the men believed that they had no choice, that they were fighting for their lives against a curse. Prosecution counters, this wasn't witchcraft, this was murder. But outside the courtroom, people argue in hushed tones. What if the curse was real? The verdict comes quickly, though, with little deliberation, all guilty. John Blymeyer and Wilbert Hess are both sentenced to life in prison. John Curry, being only 14, was sent to a reformatory until adulthood. And the court closes the case. Justice in the legal sense is served, but the shadow of the hex lingers. The supposed spellbook, the long-lost friend, is never recovered from Raymeyer's farmhouse. Some say he didn't own a copy. Others say it vanished that night, carried away before the investigators arrived. But either way, without it, the line between folklore and fact stays blurred. The gavel may have fell and the sentences were handed down, and on paper the story ended, but the hollow never let it rest. Nelson Raymeyer's farmhouse still stood, blackened, scarred, but stubbornly intact. The same way the fire had refused to finish the job, the building itself seemed unwilling to disappear. For quite a while, neighbors avoided it, children dared each other to touch the door. Hunters swore they heard footsteps inside when no one was there. Locals whispered that the curse hadn't died with Nelson and that the house itself was now marked. The press called it the Hex murder, but for the people of York County, it became something bigger, a cautionary tale about belief itself. For some, it was proof that superstition kills, that once you believe in curses, you'll see them everywhere until someone pays the price. For others, it was a dark reminder that maybe curses are real. After all, the fire hadn't destroyed the house, which seemed very strange. Visitors carried those whispers home, and soon Hex Hollow wasn't just a crime scene, it was a legend. Over the decades, the stories grew. There were claims of strange cold spots in the farmhouse, a feeling of being watched from the tree line, whispers in the silence when no one was speaking, flickers of light in the windows at night. Ghost hunters still trek out there, calling it one of Pennsylvania's most haunted places. Some swear that Nelson's spirit lingers, not vengeful, but restless and trapped. The biggest question has never gone away. Was Nelson really a witch? Today, the Raymeyer farmhouse still stands, restored by family, visited by the curious, whispered about by locals. It looks ordinary, just another relic of Pennsylvania farmland. But if you step inside on a cold night with the trees pressing in and the wind scraping the shutters, it's not hard to imagine what the three intruders saw in 1928. A man calm enough to be terrifying, a house that refused to burn, and a legend born from fear so powerful it killed. That is the story of the Hex Hollow murder. Thanks for listening to Legends May Live. If you enjoyed today's story, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Until next time, stay vigilant and stay safe, because some legends may live.